these are ambitious targets. There's going to be public pain. There's going to be personal pain to achieve them. What was your response or your reaction to it?
My response is we won't get there. We won't do this. Just to put it into context, we cut emissions by 3.6% in 2020 because basically the whole economy came to a shuddering halt. 3.6%. Over the next 5 years, we've got to do 4.8% a year and 8.3% for the 5 years after that. This is what we are awful at in Ireland. Making decisions for the long term. We can do pain, but only when our backs are up against the wall, like when the economy collapsed in 2008. And this isn't our backs up against the wall, it's our grandkids' backs up against the wall. I don't think people are engaged. I think the opposition will make hay on this. I think the kind of measures we're talking about, because we are talking about things like cutting agriculture, getting rid of cars to a large degree, or certainly fossil fueled cars. The kind of changes we're talking about will make the water charges protest look like a teddy bear's picnic.
Yeah, I understand why people are reluctant and resistant. And I think you're right. I think we only do make these kinds of decisions and take this kind of personal pain and suck it up when our back is to the wall. And our back isn't quite to the wall yet. The sea level isn't lapping at our front doors. We're not sweltering in the heat.
We can't see it.
We can't see it. We only hear about it and we're told about it. And I think that is fair. But I also think there is an awful lot of personal pain in that. And you and I were talking beforehand, and you said, sometimes I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that we act selfishly as a people, or
we do.
Those types of things.
Yeah, no, you're not putting words in my mouth. I think we all do.
But I think it is logical to act in your own self-interest as an animal, which is what we are. So I get that. I wonder when I look at this, when I look at cutting the national herd, when I look at, never mind the 4.8% cuts, which I've no idea how we're going to get to, the 8.3% cuts that are due in 5 years' time, considering how little the emissions fell by during the pandemic when we all stayed home. Now, we did heat our houses, but we all stayed home for very long periods of time. I think to myself, do we need a radical rethink? Do we need to stand back and go, none of this is achievable? And being the best boys and girls in class isn't necessarily going to be enough of an incentive to make people do it. I wonder, should we be looking at going nuclear? Should we be looking at a radical rethink rather than what we are looking at, the tinkering? Because
I think you're
degrowth of the economy is painful, and I cannot see many people wanting it to actually go ahead.
I think it's an interesting suggestion. I think the problem is it'll take us at least 10 years to build a nuclear reactor. So we're already at 2031.
And there's not much appetite for it either.
I think there is zero appetite for it. I think you're right, though. And we're going to have to start thinking outside the box. John, have we the remotest chance of hitting these targets, these ambitious targets?
Good morning, Shane. I think the first thing to say is that without these ambitious targets, well, we've got nothing at all, right? So up until really yesterday, we've been just circling around. We've been talking about climate action for well over a decade, and really making no progress at all. And I think Ciara referred to the failure, if you like, say in 2020, to achieve the kind of dramatic cuts that we expected in emissions arising from lockdown. I think people are really shocked at how little we did. And that, of course, is because, as Marie Donnelly said there, it's about the big things, the investments, and also the direction of traffic that different parts of our economy have been heading in. They're simply not moving remotely quickly enough to actually allow us to do system-wide decarbonisation.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the two big emitters. One is agriculture, the other are cars. Like, people don't want to change either of those.
Yeah, I guess I understand that. And, the problem is we're kind of in this situation where physics doesn't really care what we want or don't want. What I mean by that is we're collectively, our back is completely against the wall now. We know, and the science has been screaming about this, and we're going to be hearing, Shane, a lot more about it, as you know, in Glasgow in COP26. Basically, we're hurtling towards a global climate disaster.
Do people get that, though? Do people here get it?
I don't think they do, Shane, and I think you're right. Like, for example, even listening to some of the narrative about this over the last 12 hours, the people immediately jumping in are the vested interests. Don't cut us, cut somebody else, don't cut us. The problem here is that we have a collective action problem, meaning there's no point in saying, well, I'm not going to jump until the other guy jumps. Basically, the house is on fire, and we have to do whatever it takes, When your house is on fire, you don't sit around in a circle, in the kitchen arguing over whose fault it is, or saying, well, I'm not doing it because the guy in the living room. What you do is you do whatever it takes to deal with it. And especially if your kids are upstairs and your house is on fire, you focus on that. And that's the situation that we're in. And you asked me, Shane, do people get that? Unfortunately, they don't, because so little, particularly in Ireland, of the discussion about the climate emergency in Ireland has been absolutely hijacked by vested interests telling us how their sector is the most efficient.
And what about our political system? Is it equipped to do this? I was making the point earlier on. I thought this would be another water charges if the government start, bringing in measures on certain types of cars or cutting the herd. The opposition will make hay on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is about politics. I heard your comments from Martin Hayden, the junior minister earlier, claiming, for example, that we can achieve all our agricultural targets with a stable herd and ag climatize. He's simply wrong. Now, I know it's not palatable for some politicians to tell us the truth about this, but we really need to do better. I mean, you're talking about a problem with opposition politicians. There's a problem with a minister who's actually got responsibility in this area. So essentially, we're already getting people lining up to basically protect, as they see it, their own sector.
But see, I suppose what they would say is use the luxury of not facing election. You wouldn't get elected making the points you're making in lots of constituencies in the country.
This is absolutely true. And it's something that fascinates me. No sector in Ireland is more vulnerable to climate impacts than the agriculture sector, for the very obvious reason that agriculture happens outside. So extreme weather, top of the list between flooding and drought in particular. Flooding in Ireland is our number one threat. These are threats that the agriculture sector faces. Now, if you look on the agricultural organisations' websites and so on to find out what they're telling their members about the climate emergency, about the climate science, the answer, Shane, is absolutely nothing. They're so busy lobbying for inaction that they've forgotten to actually engage with the science. And this is really, really tragic. And we hear the same rhetoric, like I've described there, from the junior minister, where instead of saying, right, guys, the house is on fire, we have to figure out a way out of this, what we do instead is we start picking it off. And I hope we're not going to see this from the opposition as well, where instead of dealing with the emergency, what we do
John,
is...
we're going to see it. We're going to see it. We are going to see it. You're saying, I hope we don't see it. We're going to see it. I'm telling you, it's going to happen.
No, you're absolutely right, Shane. And this sort of scramble it defines how we do our politics. You used the analogy, I think, about it being a tea party compared to what we had with water charges. Well, climate change compared to anything we've had is going to make any of your worst problems look like a tea party. This is the issue, Shane, that if we don't put this fire out, then all the other things that we care about, all our sectoral interests, all our hopes for the future, they're all basically...
All right. John Gibbons, environmental journalist and commentator, thank you for talking to Newstalk Breakfast. Wouldn't it be brilliant if people actually called out politicians who are playing politics with climate change? I don't think it'll happen, though.